The maid cleaned the stage quietly, and the millionaire called her the star of the night. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation's annual gala was the kind of event that made headlines in New York's society pages. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while 500 of the city's elite mingled beneath oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. The grand ballroom of the Astor Hotel buzzed with conversations about art acquisitions, charitable donations, and the subtle negotiations that shaped the cultural landscape of Manhattan. At the center of it all stood Margaret Whitmore, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, directing the evening's proceedings with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. As the foundation's president, she had orchestrated this evening for months, ensuring every detail reflected the sophistication expected by donors whose contributions kept the arts alive in the city. Mrs. Whitmore, the auction raised 2.8 million Ds, whispered her assistant, tablet in hand, 15% above projections. Margaret nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. Excellent. The new youth program will be fully funded. Across the room, servers in crisp white uniforms moved like choreographed dancers, ensuring wine glasses never emptied and conversation never lulled. The evening's program had concluded with thunderous applause for the keynote speaker, a renowned artist whose latest installation had captured international attention. But as the night progressed and the crowd began to thin, Margaret noticed the quiet efficiency of the hotel staff, particularly the housekeeping team that had worked seamlessly throughout the evening. Invisible yet essential. One woman in particular caught her eye, a middle-aged Latina with gentle hands who had been clearing tables with such care that she never interrupted a single conversation. "Excuse me," Margaret approached the woman as she carefully stacked champagne flutes. "I don't think we've met. I'm Margaret Whitmore." The woman looked up, surprise flickering across her dark eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Rosa Hernandez. I work housekeeping." Her English carried the musical accent of her native El Salvador, each word chosen carefully. "Rosa, I've been watching you work tonight. You have such grace. You're practically floating between the tables. How long have you been with the Astor?" Rosa's cheeks flushed slightly. 8 years, ma'am. I try to be invisible. People don't like to be disturbed during important talks." Something in Rosa's demeanor, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her obvious nervousness, reminded Margaret of someone. The memory was elusive, dancing at the edge of her consciousness like candlelight in a draft. "Well, you're doing beautiful work," Margaret said warmly. "Thank you for making tonight special." As Margaret walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about Rosa, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite grasp. The evening continued around them, neither woman knowing that their brief interaction had set something profound in motion. Chapter 2. Echoes of Yesterday. 3 days later, Margaret sat in her office overlooking Central Park, unable to focus on the Foundation's quarterly reports. Rosa's face kept drifting through her thoughts, accompanied by an almost musical quality that seemed hauntingly familiar. Finally, she closed her laptop and walked to the tall windows, letting her mind wander back through the years. It was 1987 when it hit her, 38 years ago, at the very first gala she had ever attended as a young board member. She had been nervous, overwhelmed by the grandeur and intimidated by the established society figures who seemed to speak in a language she was still learning. During the evening's performance, a young woman had taken the stage to sing, not a professional entertainer, but a hotel employee who had been invited to perform by the event organizer as a special surprise. The woman had possessed a voice like liquid silver, transforming the room with a Spanish lullaby that brought tears to eyes more accustomed to appraisal than appreciation. Margaret remembered the hush that fell over the crowd, the way even the most jaded attendees had been moved by the raw emotion and beauty of the performance. "My God," Margaret whispered to the empty office. Rosa, that young singer, had been Rosa Hernandez, decades younger, but unmistakably the same woman who had served at the gala 3 nights ago. Margaret remembered how Rosa had been discovered working as a part-time cleaning staff member while studying at a local community college, how her supervisor had mentioned her beautiful voice to the event coordinator. The performance had been magical, but Margaret recalled that Rosa had seemed almost overwhelmed by the attention. Retreating quickly after her song ended, Margaret reached for her phone, dialing the Astor Hotel's management office. "This is Margaret Whitmore from the Metropolitan Arts Foundation. I need to speak with someone about one of your housekeeping staff members, Rosa Hernandez. Certainly, Mrs. Whitmore. How can we help you? I'd like to arrange a meeting with her if possible. There's something important I need to discuss. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment in Queens, Rosa was preparing dinner for her family. The cramped space was filled with warmth. Photographs of her children's graduations, her late husband's awards from his job at the post office, and small mementos from El Salvador that kept her connected to her roots. Her daughter Carmen, now 28 and working as a nurse, sat at the small kitchen table grading papers for the night classes she taught at the community center. "Mom, you've been quiet since the gala. Everything okay?" Rosa stirred the rice, considering her words. "It's nothing, mija. Just that woman, Mrs. Whitmore. She was very kind. It reminded me of when I was young, when I used to sing." Carmen looked up from her work. "You never talk about that anymore. Some dreams are for young people," Rosa said softly. "I had my time." But even as she spoke the words, Rosa felt something stirring in her chest, a flutter of the hope she thought she had carefully buried under years of practical living, raising children, and accepting that some chapters of life close forever. Neither woman slept well that night, both haunted by memories and possibilities they couldn't quite name. Chapter 3. Recognition. The following afternoon, Margaret sat across from Rosa in a quiet corner of the hotel's elegant tea room. Rosa had arrived precisely on time, wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she reserved for church and special occasions. Her hands were folded carefully in her lap, and Margaret could see the calluses earned from years of honest work. "Rosa, I have to ask you something that might sound strange," Margaret began, her voice gentle. "Did you ever perform at a gala, many years ago, here at the Astor?" Rosa's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the young woman Margaret remembered. You were there?" "I was. It was 1987, and you sang a Spanish lullaby. I was young then, new to the foundation, and I've never forgotten that performance. Your voice was extraordinary." Tears welled in Rosa's eyes. "I can't believe you remember. It was so long ago, and I was so nervous. I thought everyone had forgotten." "Never," Margaret said firmly. "It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever heard." "What happened after that night? Did you continue singing?" Rosa's hands twisted in her lap. "I wanted to. A few people gave me their cards, said they might have opportunities. But then," she paused, gathering herself, "my husband, Miguel, he got sick. Cancer. I needed to work more hours. Steady hours. The children were small. Music became a luxury I couldn't afford." Margaret felt her heart constrict. "I'm so sorry, Rosa." "Don't be sorry," Rosa said, lifting her chin with quiet pride. "I made the right choices. My Carmen is a nurse now. My son Luis is an engineer. They have good lives because Miguel and I sacrificed. But sometimes, when I'm cleaning the ballroom after events, I remember how it felt to stand on that stage. What if I told you," Margaret said carefully, "that I'd like to give you another chance?" Rosa's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The foundation is planning a special event in 3 months. Our 40th anniversary gala. It will be our biggest celebration yet, with donors and artists from around the world. I want you to perform." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Rosa was afraid to cross. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate the kindness, but I'm 53 years old. I haven't performed in decades. I'm just a cleaning lady now." Margaret leaned forward, her voice intense with conviction. "Rosa, you were never just anything. You're an artist who happened to work in housekeeping. There's a difference, and it's time the world saw it again." Rosa sat in stunned silence, feeling as though the careful walls she had built around her dreams were suddenly trembling. "I don't know if I can. What if I've forgotten how? What if my voice isn't what it used to be?" "Then we'll find out together," Margaret said. "But Rosa, I need you to understand something. That night, 38 years ago, you weren't just entertainment. You were the moment when everyone in that room remembered why we support the arts. You reminded us that beauty can come from anywhere, from anyone. That's not something you lose. It's something that deepens with time." As Rosa walked home that evening, her mind spun with possibilities and fears in equal measure. She stopped at the small park near her apartment, sitting on the bench where she and Miguel used to bring the children when they were small. Looking up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow, she hummed a few bars of the lullaby she had sung all those years ago. Her voice, though rusty from disuse, still carried that distinctive warmth that had once moved a room full of strangers to tears. Chapter 4. finding her voice again. The next 10 weeks passed in a blur of preparation that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Margaret had arranged for Rosa to work with Elena Vasquez, a retired opera singer who now taught at Juilliard. Their first meeting in Elena's Upper West Side studio had been awkward. Rosa felt out of place among the awards and photographs of famous students, while Elena wondered what Margaret had gotten her into. "Let me hear something," Elena said, settling at the piano. "Anything you're comfortable with." Rosa's voice started barely above a whisper, trembling with nerves. But as she found her footing in the familiar melody of Cucurucucu Paloma, something magical began to happen. The years of silence fell away, and the voice that emerged was different from the one that had captivated audiences decades ago. Richer now, textured with experience and loss and love. Elena's hands stilled on the keys. "Dios mío," she whispered. Margaret wasn't exaggerating. The first few weeks were the hardest. Rosa's voice, though still beautiful, had grown rusty from years of disuse. Elena worked with her on breathing exercises, making Rosa stand against the wall for hours, learning to engage her diaphragm properly again. Some days, Rosa's throat would ache, and doubt would creep in like morning fog. "I sound like an old woman trying to be young again," Rosa said one particularly difficult afternoon, her voice hoarse from practice. Elena stopped playing and turned to face her student. "Listen to me, Rosa. When I was performing at the Met, there was this conductor, Maestro Giuseppe Santori. He used to say that a young voice is like spring water, pure, clear, but without depth. A mature voice is like aged wine, complex, rich, full of stories. You're not trying to recapture your youth. You're revealing your truth." Slowly, Rosa began to understand. Elena introduced her to songs that suited her evolved voice, pieces that required the kind of emotional depth that only comes with having lived fully. They worked on Alfonsina y el Mar, a haunting ballad about the Argentine poet Alfonsina Storni, and La Llorona, a traditional Mexican song that allowed Rosa to pour her own experiences of motherhood and loss into every note. At home, Rosa's family watched her transformation with wonder and some concern. Carmen found her mother humming while she cooked, her movements lighter and more graceful, but she also noticed the calluses on Rosa's fingertips from the guitar Elena had convinced her to learn. "Mom, your hands," Carmen said one evening, gently taking Rosa's weathered fingers in her own. "Elena says I need to accompany myself for one of the songs. It's harder than I thought it would be at my age." Rosa flexed her fingers, wincing slightly. But it feels good to use my hands for something other than cleaning." Luis called from Chicago every week, amazed by the change in his mother's voice during their conversations. During one call, he could hear her practicing in the background. "Mom, you sound, I don't know, different, like you're glowing from the inside. I feel like I'm remembering who I used to be," Rosa admitted. "Or maybe discovering who I still am underneath all these years of being everyone else's caretaker." But the journey wasn't without its challenges. The physical demands of vocal training at 53 were significant. Rosa would come home from her lessons exhausted, her body aching in ways she hadn't experienced since her early cleaning jobs. Some nights, she lay awake gripped by panic attacks that left her gasping and sweating. What if she forgot the words? What if her voice cracked? What if the audience was disappointed, expecting the young woman from 1987, and finding instead a middle-aged housekeeper with calloused hands and crow's feet? The worst moment came 6 weeks into her training. Rosa was practicing at home when her voice simply gave out in the middle of a high note. The sound that emerged was a painful rasp, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't make any sound at all. Carmen found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. "What if I've damaged something? What if I've pushed too hard?" They rushed to a throat specialist the next morning. Dr. Sarah Chen, a kind woman who had worked with many professional singers, examined Rosa thoroughly. "There's no permanent damage," Dr. Chen assured them. "But you're asking your voice to do things it hasn't done in decades. Think of it like training for a marathon after years of walking. You need rest, and you need to build up gradually." Rosa was ordered to complete vocal rest for a week. No singing, minimal talking. The silence was almost unbearable. She had just rediscovered this part of herself, and now it was being taken away again. Elena visited daily, bringing herbal teas and reassurance. "This is normal, mi amor," Elena said, holding Rosa's hand. "Every serious singer goes through this. Your voice is learning to be strong again. Trust the process." Margaret, sensing Rosa's struggles, began joining her for coffee after her lessons with Elena, resumed. One afternoon, as they sat in a small cafe near Lincoln Center, Rosa finally voiced her deepest fear. "I keep thinking about that night. All those years ago," Rosa said, stirring her coffee absently. "And I was so young, so sure that singing was going to be my whole life. When it didn't happen, I told myself it was never meant to be. But now, what if I'm deluding myself? What if I'm just an old woman clinging to a fantasy?" Margaret reached across the table and covered Rosa's hand with her own. "Rosa, let me tell you something. I've been in the arts world for 4 decades. I've seen young singers with perfect technique and no soul. And I've seen older performers who could move an audience to tears with a single note. Your voice now carries everything you've lived: the love for your children, the grief for your husband, the strength it took to rebuild your life piece by piece. That's not a disadvantage. That's what makes you irreplaceable. But what if they don't see it that way? What if they just see a cleaning lady pretending to be something she's not?" Margaret's eyes flashed with fierce protectiveness. "Then they'll be missing one of the most authentic performances of their lives. Rosa, authenticity cannot be taught or manufactured. It can only be lived. And you, my dear, have lived." As the weeks passed, something beautiful began to happen. Rosa's voice, tested by rest and strengthened by careful practice, began to find its true power. Elena introduced her to Sarah Morrison, a pianist who specialized in accompanying older performers who were returning to the stage. Sarah was immediately captivated by Rosa's story and her voice. "I've worked with former Broadway stars, opera singers making comebacks, jazz legends returning to the spotlight," Sarah told Elena after their first session. "But there's something different about Rosa. When she sings, it's like she's not performing for us. She's sharing a piece of her soul." 3 weeks before the gala, Rosa achieved a breakthrough. She was working on Gracias a la Vida, the Violeta Parra song she had chosen for her performance, when something clicked. The melody, the words, her breath, her heartbeat, everything aligned in perfect harmony. Elena and Sarah sat in stunned silence as Rosa's voice filled the small studio with an intimacy and power that seemed to transform the very air around them. When she finished, Elena was crying. "That's it, mi amor. That's the voice that's been waiting inside you all these years." As the gala approached, word began to spread through New York's arts community about the special guest performer. Margaret had been deliberately mysterious about Rosa's identity, referring to her only as a rediscovered talent with a story that embodies the Foundation's mission. The New York Times arts section ran a small item speculating about the identity of the mystery performer, and social media buzzed with theories. Rosa tried to avoid the speculation, but Carmen showed her some of the online discussions. "Look, Mom, people are genuinely excited. They want to be surprised by something real." The night before the gala, Rosa couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Tomorrow, she would step onto a stage as herself, not as someone trying to recapture the past, but as a woman who had lived, lost, loved, and found her voice again in the most unexpected place of all, in the truth of her own experience. The anticipation was building throughout the city, but no one was more nervous or more ready than Rosa herself. Chapter 5. The Star of the Night. The night of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation's 40th anniversary gala transformed the Astor Hotel into a glittering constellation of New York's cultural elite. 550 guests filled the grand ballroom, including prominent artists, philanthropists, city officials, and media representatives from around the world. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, while the soft murmur of conversations in multiple languages created a sophisticated symphony of anticipation. The energy was electric with curiosity about the mystery performer Margaret had been promoting for weeks. Speculation had reached fever pitch in art circles, with some wondering if she had convinced a retired Broadway legend to return to the stage, or perhaps secured an international opera star for an intimate performance. Rosa stood in the small room behind the stage, wearing an elegant midnight blue gown that Margaret had insisted on buying for her. The dress was simple but exquisite, its flowing lines flattering Rosa's figure, while the deep color brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Her hair had been styled by Carmen's friend Maria, a hairdresser who had donated her time when she heard Rosa's story. Soft curls framed Rosa's face, and a touch of makeup highlighted her natural beauty without masking the character lines that told the story of her life. Carmen sat beside her mother, holding Rosa's trembling hands. Luis had flown in from Chicago that morning and stood near the window, still amazed to see his mother transformed into the artist he remembered from childhood lullabies. "Mommy, look at me," Carmen whispered, tilting Rosa's chin up gently. "You're going to be incredible. Do you remember what you told me when I was nervous before my nursing board exam?" Rosa managed a small smile, her voice barely audible. "And that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway." "Exactly, and you're the most courageous person I know. You raised 2 children alone after Papa died. You worked 3 jobs to put us through school. You've been performing acts of love and sacrifice your whole life. Tonight, you just get to do it with music." Luis moved closer, placing a protective hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, I've been thinking about something all day. Do you remember when I was 8 and had that terrible nightmare? You sat by my bed and sang Las Mañanitas until I fell asleep. Your voice that night, it wasn't just pretty. It was like safety and love made into sound. That's what you're going to give those people tonight." Elena appeared in the doorway, radiant with confidence and wearing a proud smile. She had changed from her practice clothes into an elegant black dress, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated chignon. "It's time, mi amor. The audience is ready for you. And more importantly, you're ready for them." Rosa stood, smoothing the fabric of her gown with nervous hands. Elena approached and gently placed a delicate silver necklace around Rosa's neck, a small pendant in the shape of a musical note. "This was my mother's," Elena said softly. "She gave it to me before my debut at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires 60 years ago. Tonight, I want you to wear it. Not for luck. You don't need luck. For connection. So you remember that you're part of something bigger than yourself, part of a long tradition of women who found their voices and shared them with the world." As they walked toward the stage entrance, Rosa could hear the conversations in the ballroom growing quieter, sensing that the moment was approaching. Margaret's voice could be heard through the curtains, beginning her introduction. Margaret took the stage as the lights dimmed to a warm, golden glow, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom with the authority of someone who had spent decades in the spotlight. She wore a stunning burgundy gown, her silver hair perfectly styled, every inch the sophisticated arts patron. But there was something different about her tonight, an emotional intensity that commanded attention. "Friends, distinguished guests, fellow lovers of the arts," she began, scanning the crowd of faces turned toward her. "Tonight, we celebrate 40 years of supporting artistic excellence in our city, 4 decades of discovering talent, nurturing creativity, and proving that the arts are not a luxury but a necessity for the human spirit." The audience applauded politely, but Margaret raised her hand for silence. "But the arts aren't just about grand performances in famous venues or galleries filled with priceless paintings. Sometimes, the most profound artistry comes from unexpected places, from voices that have been waiting patiently in the shadows to be heard again." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. 38 years ago, at our very first gala in this same ballroom, a young woman took this stage and sang with such beauty, such authenticity, that everyone present was transformed. Her performance was magical, but life, as it often does, took her in a different direction. She chose love over ambition, family over fame, service over spotlight. The ballroom was completely silent now, every person leaning forward slightly, caught in the spell of Margaret's words. "Son, for decades, this woman worked in these very halls, moving quietly among us, tending to our comfort, ensuring our events ran smoothly. She was invisible to most, noticed by few, but talent like hers cannot remain hidden forever. Tonight, I have the extraordinary privilege of welcoming her back to our stage, not as she was, but as she has become, a woman whose voice now carries the wisdom of love, the strength of sacrifice, and the beauty that comes only from a life fully lived." Margaret's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming back to this stage, after 38 years of waiting, Rosa Hernandez." The applause began before Rosa even appeared. Building as she walked gracefully onto the stage, she moved with quiet dignity, her head held high despite the curious and sometimes confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some audience members recognized her and whispered to their companions, "Wasn't she housekeeping staff?" Others simply saw an elegant woman of a certain age, wondering what story was about to unfold. Rosa felt the weight of their gaze, the mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, recognition. She could see faces she had served drinks to, tables she had cleaned, conversations she had worked around invisibly for years. But as she reached the microphone and looked out over the crowd, she found Margaret's encouraging smile, Elena's proud nod from the wings, and most importantly, Carmen and Luis in the front row, their faces glowing with love and anticipation. Rosa closed her eyes, took a deep breath that seemed to draw from the depths of her soul, and began to sing. She had chosen Gracias a la Vida by Violeta Parra, a song of gratitude for life's experiences, both joyful and sorrowful. But Rosa's interpretation was entirely her own, informed by decades of living, loving, and learning what truly mattered. Her voice, rich with the patina of years lived fully, filled the ballroom with an intimacy that seemed to reach into each person's heart and draw them into her story. The Spanish lyrics flowed like a river of pure emotion. Gracias a la vida, que me ha dado tanto. Thank you to life, which has given me so much. As she sang about being grateful for the eyes that let her see the black and white of stars, Rosa thought of all the early mornings she had watched the sun rise over Queens while walking to work, finding beauty in the everyday miracle of a new day. When she sang about the heart that beats with such force when she sees the fruit of the human brain, her voice soared with the memory of watching her children graduate, of seeing Luis receive his engineering degree, of witnessing Carmen save her first life as a nurse. The audience, even those who didn't understand Spanish, felt the universal language of a mother's love and pride. As the song progressed, Rosa's voice grew stronger, more confident, carrying the weight of love and loss and hope that made her performance transcendent. She sang about the alphabet that created words and thought of all the bedtime stories she had read, all the homework she had helped with, all the conversations that had shaped her family. She sang about words like brother, love, tears, and thought of Miguel, of the life they had built together and the grief that had nearly broken her. The ballroom was completely silent except for Rosa's voice, which seemed to fill not just the space, but the souls of everyone present. Wealthy patrons who had attended hundreds of performances found themselves moved to tears by something indefinable, perhaps the authenticity, perhaps the reminder that the most beautiful music comes not from perfect technique, but from perfect truth. Young artists in the audience felt inspired by the reminder that talent isn't bound by age or circumstance, that it's never too late to find your voice. Older audience members saw their own deferred dreams reflected in Rosa's courage. Margaret watched from the side of the stage, tears streaming down her face, knowing she was witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. When Rosa reached the final verses, her voice took on an almost ethereal quality. She sang about being grateful for life, which had given her laughter and tears, and her voice broke slightly on the word llanto, tears, as she thought of all the nights she had cried herself to sleep after Miguel's death, wondering how she would continue alone. But then, her voice strengthened again as she sang the closing lines about life, giving her the song that distinguishes between joy and sorrow, the song that is hers and everyone's, the song that is both personal and universal. As she held the final note, Rosa opened her eyes and looked directly into the audience, no longer seeing critics or patrons or strangers, but fellow human beings who, like her, had experienced love and loss, hope and disappointment, the full spectrum of what it means to be alive. When she finished, the silence that followed was profound, not empty, but full of something sacred. For several heartbeats, nobody moved, as if they were afraid to break the spell that Rosa had woven around them. Then, as if released from a collective held breath, the ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The standing ovation began in the front rows and rippled backward like a wave, encompassing the entire room. People were not just clapping, they were cheering, some calling out, "Brava!" in voices thick with emotion. Margaret saw grown men wiping their eyes, society matrons openly weeping, young people standing on their chairs to get a better view of this remarkable woman who had just reminded them why art matters. The ovation continued for what felt like an eternity. Later, Margaret would time it at nearly 7 minutes. Rosa stood at the microphone, overwhelmed by the response, tears streaming down her face as she curtsied gracefully, her hand pressed to her heart. She looked toward Carmen and Luis, who were standing and applauding with expressions of pure joy and pride. Margaret joined Rosa on stage, taking her hand and raising it high like a boxing referee declaring a champion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret said, her voice carrying over the continuing applause, "the star of the night, Rosa Hernandez. As the applause finally began to subside, Margaret raised her hand for attention one more time. Rosa's story is why the Metropolitan Arts Foundation exists. Art isn't just in our museums and concert halls. It's in every person who has something true to share with the world. Tonight, Rosa reminds us that we must look beyond the surface, beyond our assumptions, to find the extraordinary in the everyday. As the formal program concluded and the crowd slowly began to move toward the reception area, Rosa found herself surrounded by people wanting to meet her, to congratulate her, to ask about her story. A prominent music critic from the Times approached, asking if she would be open to an interview. A recording executive handed her his card, suggesting they should talk about possibilities. Young musicians wanted to know about her technique, her training, her journey. But the moment that meant the most came when Carmen and Luis pushed through the crowd to reach their mother. Carmen threw her arms around Rosa, both women crying and laughing simultaneously. "Mom, I've never been prouder of anyone in my life," Carmen whispered. "Tonight, you weren't just singing for them. You were singing for everyone who's ever been told they're too old, too late, too ordinary to dream big. You were singing for every immigrant woman who came to this country with nothing but hope. You were singing for every mother who sacrificed her dreams for her children." Luis, usually reserved with his emotions, was openly weeping. "Mom, when you sang about being grateful for life, I thought about how grateful I am for you, for everything you gave up so Carmen and I could have better lives. Tonight, you got something back, and I'm so happy for you." Elena appeared beside them, beaming with the pride of a teacher whose student has exceeded every expectation. "Rosa, in 40 years of teaching, I have never been more honored to work with anyone. What you did tonight, that wasn't just a performance. That was a master class in what it means to be human." As the evening wound down, Margaret approached Rosa with a proposal that would change everything. "Rosa, I hope you don't mind, but I've been thinking about this all evening. The foundation has been looking for someone to head our new community outreach program, working with local schools and community centers to identify and nurture artistic talent in underserved neighborhoods. Someone who understands that art exists everywhere, in every person, waiting to be discovered. Someone who knows what it's like to have talent overlooked, dreams deferred, but who also knows that it's never too late to find your voice." Rosa looked around the ballroom, at the lingering guests still discussing her performance in animated clusters, at the stage where she had just reclaimed a piece of her soul, at Carmen and Luis, who were glowing with happiness, at the life that was suddenly opening up before her in ways she had never imagined. Would this mean I could help other people find their voices too? Exactly. You could work with young mothers who gave up their artistic dreams, older adults who think it's too late to start, immigrants who feel invisible in a new country. You could show them what you showed us tonight, that talent doesn't have an expiration date, that authenticity is more powerful than perfection, that everyone deserves to be seen and heard. Rosa felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sensation she recognized as hope, taking root and beginning to grow. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear, carrying the same conviction that had moved an entire ballroom just hours earlier. "Yes, I would love that more than anything." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Rosa stood alone on the stage one final time, looking out at the empty ballroom. The confetti from the celebration had been swept away by the night cleaning crew, colleagues who had approached her throughout the evening with congratulations and amazement. The lights were dimming, and soon the space would return to the quiet that Rosa knew so well from her years of working in these halls after events had ended. But something fundamental had changed, not just in the room, but in Rosa herself. She was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten, no longer someone whose dreams belonged only to the past. She had been seen, truly seen, not as a role or a function, but as a complete human being with a gift worth sharing. As she finally left the stage, Rosa carried with her the memory of 500 people on their feet, applauding not just her voice, but her courage, her authenticity, her reminder that the most beautiful art comes from the deepest truth. She was still a mother, still a widow, still a woman who knew the value of hard work and sacrifice. But now, she was also, once again and forever, an artist. For the first time in decades, Rosa Hernandez felt like the star she had always been meant to be, not because she had finally received recognition, but because she had finally remembered that the light had been inside her all along, waiting patiently for the right moment to shine. Closing, warm, reflective tone. And there we have it, beautiful souls. Rosa's story reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim the parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. In a world that often tells us our worth is tied to our youth, our status, or our circumstances, Rosa showed us that true artistry, true beauty, only deepens with time and experience. Sometimes we need someone like Margaret to see us, really see us, and remind us of who we are beneath the roles we play. And sometimes we need the courage to step back onto our own stage, even when our hands shake and our hearts race with fear. If Rosa's story touched your heart tonight, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. Hit that like button, subscribe to join our family, and tell me in the comments, what stage are you ready to step back onto? What part of yourself are you ready to reclaim? Until next time, remember, you are never too old, never too late, and never too ordinary to shine. The world is waiting for your light. Sweet dreams, and thank you for listening.